Hello and a very warm welcome to the Late Breaking F1 podcast presented by Harry Eade and me, Ben Hocking. Dropping like flies here, mate.
Mate, they're all leaving us. At this rate, it's just going to be Clives.
But not Sam.
But not Sam. Could you imagine? Sam's not going to come today, but we have got Clives Picklesworth for an entire podcast. It's no Sam today either. He's having the best time, I am told, in Newmarket, of all places.
That's the thing, like, ordinarily when one of us misses an episode, we make up a reason as to why they're missing, but the actual reason is better than anything we can make up. He's in Newmarket.
Having a training course on horses, I think, is a
training horse.
A training horse. Yeah. Those training horses. Yeah, so anyway, so you're just stuck with me and Ben for today. The best half of Late Breaking.
You know what? I can't argue with that. It's a great point. Well made. We've got we've still got plenty to cover off, even though we are in the midst of January because, well, Mohammed Ben Sulayem still exists, folks. Before that, we are also going to cover off a top 5 list of Verstappen's best seasons in F1 and a comment from Adrian Newey about the 2026 regulations. And apologies, first of all, folks, because we would have definitely tackled this on Sunday, but we recorded it early and in the process completely forgot it was our 500th episode as well. So well done us.
Happy 501, folks. There's only 2 of us here.
The crowning achievement of episode 501 is we're going to talk about this week-old news of the FIA and what they're doing now. The FIA has outlined new guidelines for punishing drivers' misconduct ahead of the 2025 season, including tiered fines for breaches, with F1 drivers facing the highest penalties. Stewards can consider mitigating or aggravating factors, with punishments ranging from fines to bans and points deductions for repeated offences. Misconduct includes moral injury to the FIA, public incitement, violations of neutrality, and non-compliance during official ceremonies. F1 drivers face fines of 40 to 60,000 euros for a first offence, 80 to 120,000 and a suspended suspension for a second, and 120 to 180,000 plus a 1-month suspension and maybe points deduction for a third. Violating the neutrality clause, by the way, also requires an official apology.
Violating the neutrality clause, that sounds like something that would happen in Switzerland. No? What?
Yeah, it might well be. Sauber better watch out. The others will be okay. Where do you want to start with this?
Firstly, I fear Sam will be very sad to have missed. I mean, we'll get his thoughts on a different episode, I'm sure. But yeah, right. We don't have no drivers left.
Oh no.
We're going to have nothing left to watch. As we've already said with Mohammed Ben Sulayem and his thoughts on swear. Can I just check? What is violating the Neutrality Act? What does that mean?
That is anything like political, personal statement that they don't get approval from the FIA to do.
I mean, Lewis Hamilton's not going to be there after race 1 then on that basis. Look, this is just again, when there are so many issues with the FIA and, their ruling of F1, this is just a non-issue. And we see, for some reason, they're making such a big deal. I say they. I believe it's probably he. Mohammed Ben Sulayem is making such a big deal out of this, but this is just pathetic, and it's things that the fans of the sport do not care about, and none of this will stop drivers from doing these things. And if it gets to I fear we're going to get to a point where it'll be the drivers versus the FIA. The drivers in F1 versus the FIA. And for the FIA, that's a crap position to be in. Because at least before, you might have had some support from the drivers on some issues. But if you're going to turn on the lot of them here, and I know it is perhaps targeting those who are less willing to comply, Max Verstappen, especially with swearing. But this is it's now targeting all of them, and that's a bold move. It's a bold move to go down this route, and I really, what are you doing? Is apt here.
Definitely.
Is apt. Is very apt. It's a bizarre ruling, and we'll get onto this, but it does really feel Mohammed Ben Sulayem motivated, not the general FIA, because we've done many years of F1 without this sort of need for any ruling, and what I just don't understand. This doesn't feel like it's addressing an issue. It's just Ben Sulayem increasingly facing criticism for this bizarre agenda he has, and he's doubling down on it, and it's going to backfire. There's no way this doesn't backfire.
I mean, the drivers versus the FIA, I agree with you. I can see it going down that path, and it always goes well. Source, the early 1980s.
He really goes well. Lots of nice pictures of mattresses in a hotel room.
Yeah. But honestly, we might be, maybe we're not at the later stages of that, but we might be at the earlier stages of it based on what he's doing here. I'll be honest, folks, like a bit of a look behind the curtain. Whenever I'm preparing these topics, I've got my notepad just below, if you're watching on YouTube, just below me here. And I'll scribble down some notes depending on what the topic is. Sometimes I'll have a lot of notes, sometimes won't have many at all. I was sat looking at my piece of paper for about 10 minutes, having no idea where to start with this.
Where this is the thing, it's so bizarre. It's almost difficult to form any coherent thoughts on it, because it's just, why? What? The only thing I can think of is why. Why are you doing this? What's he gonna prove?
I feel like, I mean, the F1 drivers and all the FIA drivers, because this isn't just an F1 thing. This is F1 drivers will be penalised the most, but it's a tiered system. So I've seen a few people comment that Formula E drivers who are even more swear happy than Formula One drivers might be in trouble. But they have always needed to follow a sporting code. Like, that's always existed. But it's all very vague, and there's always been an issue of having different interpretations of the code. There's no real guidelines for penalties, and it's all been done on a case-by-case basis. So, Verstappen at Singapore is very much evidence of that. I know Ben Sulayem last year turned around to the stewards and basically said, yeah, if you can fine anyone up to $1 million, I can't remember euros or dollars now, but you can fine anyone up to $1 million. It's like, well, yeah, that's a strong guideline. Anywhere between 0 and 1 million. Go ahead, stewards. What do you want to give a penalty out for? So we've always called for consistency in many respects from the FIA and standardizing processes. To an extent, this could do that. As a concept, I don't mind it. The problem is, I can't say the problem, because there's a lot more than one problem.
Problems.
There's so many problems with this, because you have to question why this has been introduced. I don't think Ben Sulayem is sat there in his office going, we need to standardize all of this and bring in consistency. Because if he thought that, then about 90% of the way the FIA works wouldn't work that way, because he would have solved it, because he cares about consistency. So I don't believe that's the reason he's doing all of this. It's the definitions that they've produced, and we'll get on to maybe some of them in a bit, but they're all still loose and there's no examples. It's really difficult to know what the stewards are going to do with a lot of these. If examples were provided and there was a clearer definition of what misconduct actually is, maybe there's a world where I'm on board with this, but I just feel like this is a power-hungry wannabe tyrant in Ben Sulayem flexing his muscles because he has a different opinion on something than F1 drivers have, which is something as trivial as swearing. I just don't believe this is being done for the right reasons, put it that way.
No, it's not. This is just an agenda, right?
Yes,
a big old agenda.
Did you see what? Because obviously multiple news sources have reported this. Did you see the BBC's report on this?
I did not. Why? What have the BBC said?
Well, Andrew Benson is the chief Formula One reporter for the BBC.
Big Sebastian Vettel fan, actually.
Massive Sebastian Vettel. A couple of things that came out. Multiple sources told Andrew Benson and or the BBC that a lot of people at the FIA were against this. One source said it was pushed through on a snap e-vote. Bear in mind that there is a World Motorsports Council meeting coming up that they could have done this at, but instead apparently it was pushed through on a snap evo, and there was no consultation with stakeholders, the Grand Prix Drivers Association or anyone else. So if your starting point is maybe this is an agenda from Ben Sulayem and Ben Sulayem only, none of those reports turn you the other way. Like, that sounds like an agenda.
A snap evo, which is
come on
basically on the day everyone's working from home. Hence why it's an e-vote. We're doing this thing. You must now vote on it. Ridiculous.
But believable.
Oh, yeah. I mean, sadly, very believable. This could be particularly... The F1 and the FIA have been at loggerheads now for a good year or so. And we've spoken about this before with the Andretti... With the Andretti Cadillac entry, which obviously now is just the Cadillac entry, but the FIA were going against F1's wishes because they immediately allowed Andretti in, whereas F1 didn't. But this is some sort of play. This has all been some sort of play in a wider struggle for power between the F1 and the FIA. That Ben Sulayem's just going to lose. I'm not sure where he thinks this is going to go for him, because F1, if they truly needed to, could eventually move away from the FIA and get their own governing body. I just feel like they could do that, and the FIA need F1 as many. Obviously the FIA they have many other world championships. World Endurance Championship, Formula E, you've already mentioned, Rally. There's loads, but F1 is where they make their dollar. And I think
you can add all the other series up.
Exactly. It won't make up for it. So, yeah, I struggle to see why or where this is going to go for Ben Sulayem, but it's just stupid.
Yeah, and the thing is as well, like, the FIA are basically giving themselves the guidelines, because Ben Sulayem himself, in theory, isn't going to be giving out the penalties. At least that's the process. It will be, stewards, but the stewards still belong to the FIA. So, I mean, it's dictating how it will be for themselves. And there was an adjustment, I think, in November or December of some statutes of the FIA where essentially their accountability, I think, has been reduced as a result of those changes. And now we've got this in addition to that. Another point that needs to be raised is that you remember the Grand Prix Drivers Association letter that came out pre-Christmas, whenever that was, calling for greater transparency of where these fines are going. Zero mention of that in here.
Interesting. Do they not cover that in the Snappy vote?
You know what? No, they neglected to include it.
That is very, very interesting indeed. It's a surprise, actually, how they didn't cover that one off.
Yeah, it feels like it's, if we're looking at...
God, George Russell's got his pen out already. He's scribing the next letter as we speak.
Well, I think because obviously the GPDA was asked for comment when all of this came out, and I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the exact quote, but it was essentially, "We don't have a statement at this time." So something's cooking.
Oh boy, he'd be cooking.
They can definitely, like that transparency piece, though, they can definitely continue to work with that, because that's something they've directly asked for. And I think it's a completely fair ask. And it has just been
ignored.
Nope, brushed under the rug.
I can't wait for it. It's going to be excellent. George Russell, take 2. But like I say, it's a fair point for them to ask for, and the fact that the FIA haven't even at this point acknowledged that as a question they need to answer with this is, again, proves that this hasn't been very well thought out.
I think Ben Sulayem did actually have a response to that statement a little bit closer to the time. Again, paraphrasing because I can't remember what it was, but he dismissed it fairly quickly. So I don't know. The drivers, as I know we have to go back a long way, over 40 years, but when the drivers do use their collective bargaining power, it's pretty powerful. Like if they can rack up penalties for something as easy as swearing, like you don't have to work to get a penalty at swearing, what are you going to do if all 20 turn around and swear en masse?
Yeah, no race today, guys. Well, this is the thing. I shared this video on Twitter. The F1, you know, the Drive to Survive world of F1 thrives off the drama, and the part of that drama is the passion of drivers and team principals, I must add.
Maybe more so.
Well, exactly, Gunther Steiner. But the whole drama of F1 it thrives off that passion, and a lot of that comes out in the form of swearing with these drivers. And this video I shared is an example of that. It's just from Netflix, that video, and yeah, we're not going to have any drivers left. This is what I mean. They're all going to swear in race one, and they're all done. Some of them swear just accidentally in a press conference, for crying out loud. It's also, I know they all speak English, but a lot of them, this isn't their first language, so they might say things that it means, not that it means different things, but you can't be that annoyed at them if they end up swearing in English when it's not even their first language. This is a topic, I know we have to address it, is absolutely ridiculous.
Yes, it is absurd.
Absurd.
You're right about like it not being a first language for many as well, because again, going back to Gunther Steiner, like one of the reasons or the main reason he cites for swearing as much as he does is like in terms of like England, he grew up in England when he came over in a garage. Like that was the environment he was in. And you're going to get that with some of the other drivers who have come over to England at the age of, I don't know, say 14, 15 and started their karting career. Like that's inevitably what they'd have grown up with. And also what's the issue anyway? Like,
no, I know. What is the issue? Grow up. Do you know what, Ben? Grow up.
Go on. Mohammed Ben Sulayem strikes again.
Honestly, he's won that LB immediately.
No competition for the other 11 months. I did want to quickly run through like some of the sub-articles of misconduct, because there is a distinction between some of them, and there are a few things I wanted to point out. So moral injury or loss to the FIA is the first one. That sounds to me like they don't want to be critiqued. They don't want people to turn around and say, the FIA messed this up. Yeah.
Which is a bad place to be.
We like censorship.
But also, we like censorship. The 2016 Mexican GP, where Sebastian Vettel's absolutely fuming, and he basically tells Charlie Whiting to F himself. That I can understand if you're going to go down that route. But that's because it's like a personal attack on a member of the FIA. And I think he got a penalty. Did he get a penalty for that or for something?
He got something for that.
Yeah. That I understand. Drivers just disagreeing with a decision or something the FIA does as a body, governing body. No, you can't do that.
And that's why you've got to hope that there is at least some common sense that's applied by the stewards here, because like you say, if a driver disagrees with a decision, that's surely okay. If a driver openly accuses the FIA of cheating based on no evidence, then yeah, that is a problem. And you would hope that common sense prevails and that one gets penalized and the other doesn't. The issue, of course, is if you've got drivers versus stewards, and the jury is the stewards, It feels like they're probably going to side with themselves.
Playing both roles in the courtroom.
Here's another good one as well. So one of them was non-compliance during official ceremonies. So we'd have to assume that's like wearing an unapproved T-shirt on the podium or something like that, but not complying with a ceremony. And you've also got another one is incitement to violence or hatred. Can you guess which one has the higher penalty?
I'm guessing not the incitement to violence.
No, that one is more acceptable than non-compliance during official ceremonies.
Oh, well, that's good. So you can punch someone and get less of a penalty than being late to the grid national anthem. That's great news.
Yeah. Verstappen punches Ocon and then is late for the podium, but gets more of a penalty for being late.
He's like halfway down the grid and he's like, I'm going to be late for the podium or I punch Ocon. What do I do first?
It's like the two buttons meme, like
sweating.
Yeah.
Oh,
you're gonna have to choose. Sorry, Max.
Dear.
I don't know. This is gonna be another one of those that isn't gonna go away just yet. So this will be the first time we talk about this. I'm gonna put a $5 on the fact that it won't be the last time. Should we take our first break on this episode? On the other side, we've got some comments from Adrian Newey about the 2026 regs. Welcome back, everyone. Adrian Newey, if you haven't heard of him, he's a pretty good designer when it comes to F1.
He's all right.
Yeah, it's not bad. He believes next year's rule change could allow one team to dominate the way Mercedes did after 2014. He said, I think there has to be a big chance that it's an engine formula at the start. The reality is I can't remember another time in Formula One when both the chassis regulations and the engine regulations have changed simultaneously, and where, in this case, the chassis regulations have been very much written to try to compensate for the power unit regulations. So it's an extra dimension. I think the engine manufacturers will have learned to an extent from the lack of preparation that the rivals to Mercedes did prior to that change, but there has to be a chance that one manufacturer will come out well on top and it will become a power unit dominated regulation, at least to start with. And there's a chance if it's on the combustion engine side of it, that will last throughout the length of the formula, because the way the regulations are written, it's quite difficult for people who are behind to catch up. Do you think he's right that there is a chance we have this sort of thing emerge?
I mean, with every rule change in F1, there is that chance. And you could say for a little while with the latest rule change, we did have that with Red Bull. Look at 2023. I guess the difference there is immediately off the bat, it wasn't. Because 2022 was at least competitive with Ferrari. And then 2024, for the most part, was very competitive. So we've not really had that with this one particularly. So I mean, there is always that danger. I would hazard a guess that we won't get a 2014 style. I don't think we'll, not at least with the way F1's currently run by Liberty Media, I don't think we'll ever see a 2014 style Mercedes dominance again. We spoke about this on our latest historic review. You can listen to it on the Patreon with the 2014 Canadian GP. Get that socket out, boy. There's a plug. Bow. But yeah, 2014 was such an anomaly because unlike the current formula we have with F1, which is very much led by F1, we had Ross Brawn, at the helm of these new designs of cars with the sole purpose of making them cars that can overtake and follow each other more easily than we've had before. And that was all, and it was all entertainment driven, basically. Obviously, there's still F1, there's still the technological aspect, but it was entertainment driven. The 2014 regulations were driven by the manufacturers, and Mercedes stole the march on the rest of them by starting the development of that engine 4 years before we even got to those rule changes when they entered in 2010. So I just don't think we will ever get that sort of domination again. There could be some domination at the start, but we've seen how quickly things have closed up with this current rule set, with just the way the cars are. And I would suggest even if there is a team that get the jump at the start, the field will close up relatively quickly again. And you'd have to suggest, it could be an advantage for those for his very own team. It could well be an advantage that they get a head start on the rest of them. So, yeah, I'm not too fearful in that. I sense he's having war flashbacks to the 2014 season with Red Bull. Again, we touched on this in the historic review, where the Red Bull was the slowest thing in a straight line. There were snails that went faster than it. And for all of his designing genius, he couldn't design a car that went quicker in a straight line because you need a good engine for that. So I guess that's what he's referencing here, what he's a bit worried about. But I just don't think we're in the same. We're not in the same zone as that. So I don't think it'll be that bad.
I think there is a chance the team dominates, but I'm with you that I doubt it will be to the same extent of Mercedes in 2014, because oh boy, that car was quick, and I don't know if there have really been any cars, or at least many cars in F1 history that have been as dominant as that to start a new set of regulations. There is a chance something like it happens, just based on, Adrian Newey here is talking very specifically about the 2026 regs. He's not just saying, at the start of any regulations, one team can dominate. He is like going into depth about why this set of regulations in particular could lead to that. I think he's probably right that the engine will be the bigger thing to get right or not get wrong from the start, because that, as you've already said, like 2014 is a great example of where you can have what I think was a pretty good chassis like Red Bull had, but there's nothing you can do about it because there's just no grunt in the engine. You referenced the 2014 Canadian GP that we watched, and that was it. Mercedes essentially gave Red Bull that race on a plate, right? Like it was there for the taking. And Red Bull, even though they did eventually take it, they should have been miles past them based on how quick the car looked in the corners. And then as soon as you get onto a straight line, Adrian Newey must have been cursing Renault for the entirety of that year, is the summary. People will have, most of the teams and most of the manufacturers were in some form or another around in 2014. And even though it's been over 10 years now, they'll still be scarred by how much of a jump Mercedes got on them. And I just think for the most part, they won't allow that same thing to develop again. Yes, there's absolutely a chance that someone or a team looks at these regulations and it clicks more than it does for the other teams and other drivers. But I don't think one team will have outworked the other teams. I don't think one team would have stolen a march.
Sorry, but I was going to say, I would foresee this going more like a Brawn GP than a Mercedes 2014. A team that a couple of teams get the march at the start that maybe you don't expect, but other teams catch up very quickly, and maybe not by the end of the first year, but possibly so. Brawn GP being an exception because they can do anything to that car, but I just fear, I think that's the way it could go. You could get a team that jumps. A couple of teams that get the head start, get the jump start. I referenced Aston Martin, Williams. These are the teams that's what they're hoping for. But I'd suggest that the might of Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, etc., would not be far behind them.
I'd also say the way that Formula One is now, that not saying that there's still plenty of innovation in the sport, but the way the regulations are set, there's so much standardization across the board. A lot of parts are standardized now to the point where a massive loophole like what Brawn were able to essentially do in 2009, I think it's going to be trickier for one team and one person to spot something on that level again. I can see things being quite a bit more even. The one thing that I do think is a valid point though from Adrian Newey here is that it will be tricky to catch up. And he doesn't reference it directly, but with the budget cap that we have in effect now, if one team does really steal a march at the beginning of these regulations and none of the other teams can outspend that team to get back to them, it might be difficult to catch. So I am very much hoping we turn up in 2026 and there isn't a team that has done that, because it would be just ridiculously ironic if the one reason, the budget cap was brought in to instill parity in the sport. It would be very ironic if that was the thing that actually prevented it. But I don't think it will.
No, I am with you. I'm pretty hopeful for these new regulations, and in the same way I was hopeful for the current ones we've got. 2023 will seem like a bit of a blot in the copybook of this current set of regulations, because for the most part they've actually been very competitive, and the field is the closest it's been for, well, maybe ever, quite frankly.
Quite possibly. I mean, like you said, in our recent episode that we did in person, when we were listing our top 5 things to look forward to in 2025, your number one was the 4 teams out front could be battling for a championship, whether that's drivers or teams. And I'm on board that hopium, because
oh boy,
yes, please, that sounds good. How much does F1 need this new set of regulations to go well for them? Obviously, we know the sport is continuing to grow, but reverting anything back to like 2014 might be tricky. So how much does it need to keep that parity to an extent?
I actually think less rides on. I mean, to be fair, it depends how this season goes. If this season it becomes an all-timer, more difficult. But I think there's less riding on these regulations than there were. Sorry, there's less riding on the 2026 regulations than there were on these current regulations, because the 2022 set that was Liberty. Liberty have come in and done a lot of work in, how the sport is presented, getting fans to the circuit, getting fans more involved. Obviously, there's the Drive to Survive aspect, which they've excelled at. But the 2022 regs were the sort of the last bit of that puzzle, I guess, of their vision for the sport. And this one was kind of the hardest one, because it was such a, it was a technical regulation overhaul. So I think with 2026, they've obviously done this bit already. And I just think less will be riding on it. Obviously, if we get to the end of 2025 and it has been an absolute banger with 4 teams involved in a championship fight, I'm sure there'll be many of us going, "Oh God, I wish we weren't getting rid of these regs." However, we said the same thing, similar things, I guess, at the end of 2021, because finally those regulations are allowed. Well, not allowed, sorry, but within those regulations, a team had caught up to Mercedes with Red Bull and Verstappen. And I think at the end of 2021, I probably was one of those people that was like, "Oh, I could do with another year of this," because it finally feels like we're there. And even 2020, if you take out Mercedes, was actually a very competitive year with all the other teams. So it was very close. So those last 2 years, things had really closed up. And I guess we're probably at the same point now. But having said that, 2022 was relatively good, and 2024 was very good for competitiveness. So I don't think F1 will be as worried. Obviously, they do not want a 2014 Mercedes dominant style situation, but like I've already said, I just don't think that's going to happen. So, yeah, I don't think there's much riding on it. Obviously, they want it to work, especially with bringing in new teams, and this is one of the things that this new set has been sort of not pitched at, but it's helped other teams. It sparked the interest of other manufacturers or teams, etc., wanting to be involved in the sport. Audi, Cadillac. So if they are spectacularly dominant by one team, then that might affect things. But yeah, I just don't think there's as much riding on it as we've had before.
And I think there's also an important distinction that isn't always made between the ideal season. You have great racing and you have a great championship fight. You can have a good season without a championship fight. It is perfectly possible. Like, for example, 2024, if we look at a few of the races, you remember the stretch after Red Bull were very dominant in the first sort of 5-6 races of the season. We had Imola, we had Spain, and we had Canada as examples. Verstappen won all 3 races. But if those 3 races were replicated like 8 times over to create a 24 race championship, and Verstappen won all the races, that would have been an exciting season. Like, just because Verstappen had run away with the title, yes, you would of course want a title fight as well. But there's more to it. Like, you still want each individual Grand Prix to have a level of excitement, which 2024 had. So yes, you want to see a variety of winners. That is the ideal, but you can have very exciting races with the same person just about winning each and every time. If they're able to be the difference, it is doable. Even if there is a dominant team in 2026, doesn't immediately mean it's a disaster.
No, I agree.
I wanted to read out something else from Adrian Newey a bit later on in the same quote, as he goes on to talk a little bit about him leaving Red Bull. He said, if you'd said to me 12 months ago, would I be leaving Red Bull and then now ultimately starting again, I would have said, no, you're crazy. But for various reasons, I felt I wouldn't be true to myself if I stayed at Red Bull. So the first difficult decision was exactly that. Do I stay at Red Bull or not? I obviously came to the conclusion that being honest with myself, I couldn't. And then having made that decision, it was then what to do next. I wouldn't be true to myself if I stayed at Red Bull. That stood out.
It's very interesting, Adrian. It's very outspoken of him. I don't know that's not very outspoken, but for Adrian Newey,
yeah,
it's quite outspoken. Yeah, look, I think he's been very quiet about the whole Red Bull thing. There's been no public fallout, but you do imagine, or that quote alone would lead you to imagine that there was something there that he was no longer happy with whatever was going on behind the scenes at Red Bull. And obviously he's been treated with great respect for it as he's departed. It's all been very, thank you for your services, it's been an honor, etc., which quite rightly too. But I think there's something, and I'm sure it will come out one day, but there must have been something more that's happened behind the scenes there, because if things were going well, why wouldn't Adrian Newey stay and continue making winning cars or helping to make winning cars? He doesn't need to prove anything anymore. So what I think, if it was going well, he probably would have stayed. So clearly something has gone awry.
Yep, that was my conclusion. It really, like I say, when I read that quote, I was like, "Oh, that's interesting," because those are very carefully selected yet quite powerful words. Like, he's not just dropped that in there like it's a natural set. Like, it's not natural. It's like, I wouldn't be true to myself. Like, that points to this being a moral decision. And I'm happy to be corrected on this, but I just think this is a man who could say a lot, but as you've already referenced, based on the type of person he is, he probably won't. It's not really his style. But even for, again, as you say, for Adrian Newey, this is quite outspoken. We know that Red Bull wasn't / isn't a happy camp. Like, we did have Christian Horner, Helmut Marko, the Verstappens, all dueling, and Adrian Newey, it wouldn't surprise me if he got to a point where he just didn't think it was worth being in that environment. The fact that he didn't take very long to, I know he had his gardening leave and he starts work just over a month from now, but he didn't waste that much time in selecting what his next move was going to be. It's not like he sat out of regulations. He didn't, what was it? Not even 6 months from him leaving to it being announced that he was joining Aston Martin. And he didn't just wake up 6 months after it happened and go, you know what, Aston Martin. Like, that if the gap between the announcements was 6 months, the gap between the announcement and him talking to other teams was probably far less than that. So yeah, I think there's more to be said. Whether it will come out or not, I don't think it will come out from Adrian Newey, but there are plenty of other more talkative people who would have been in that discussion who probably will at some point. Helmut Marko's probably got something to say.
He's always got something to say.
True. Right, let's take our second break on this episode. On the other side, we've got some comments from James Vowles. Welcome back, everyone. Williams team principal James Vowles acknowledged the risks of his aggressive restructuring approach, admitting some changes may have been too much for the team to handle in 2024. We have to change a lot within our organization in terms of infrastructure and technology to get us to the right place, he said, reflecting on both successes and missteps. Vowles highlighted the concept of change saturation, explaining you can change things at a certain rate. You go too far, though, and you break it. In hindsight, moving things a little bit further that we can really deal with in one go. This aligns with Vowles' philosophy when developing the 2023 Williams, stating earlier in 2024 that he wanted to stress the system to the absolute limit to understand where it's breaking and how it's breaking. And it was the only winter that they were going to do that. There was a lot of change at Williams last year, particularly in terms of personnel, and we have to trust James Vowles that a lot happened in terms of processes that we'll never get to see as well. But was it right to make so much change all at once?
Look, it will remain to be seen, I guess, until we get to 2026. But I'd suggest, I think it probably was the right way to do this, because he hasn't, from when he's come, joined the team, which was beginning of 2023. He's had 2 years now. We spoke about this very recently with Ai Komatsu at Haas. He's had a year to bed in to that team as team principal, and then started making changes. So year one for Vowles was seeing everything that I guess needed to be changed. Year two has been making those adjustments, making those changes, and he doesn't have time to hang around, because at the end of year three, he needs or wants them to be ready for 2026, which is this big rule change that the Williams are pinning a lot of hope on. So I don't think this is a bad thing. It's obviously made things tricky from his side and from Williams' side, especially during 2024. But as I said, if we get to 2026 and the car's terrible, then we'll say this hasn't actually paid off. But I think it makes sense for him to have this approach, because time's not on his side.
Yeah, I think he was right to change as much as he did in 2024. As mentioned, there were a lot of hype. There was one point in the earlier part of the year, I forget exactly when, but sort of like April time, where it felt like every other day Williams were making some sort of signing to the team. So there was a massive influx of talent there. And then, of course, James Vowles went a step further and actually changed drivers mid-season and hired a different driver for this season, of course, Carlos Sainz. And as mentioned, there were probably a lot of process changes that we will never get eyes on, but have to trust that they went ahead and did. I remember James Vowles, like when he first came in, the team when he came in was so underfunded from the years of the Williams family. And that's no disrespect to Claire and Frank, but it got to a point where they were really struggling versus their rivals. James Vowles, when he came in, was essentially managing the different parts of the car via an Excel spreadsheet. Like they didn't have a system, a fairly basic system you'd imagine that other teams would have had. So it was always going to be a process for James Vowles to get this team back to anything like serious competitiveness. And of course, he's far from that point at this moment in time, but he is and always has been about these medium and long-term decisions. And I think making all those changes in 2024 was part of that. I think you would rather completely sacrifice 1 year than somewhat sacrifice 2 or 3 years. 2024 was tough. Like they fell back in the Constructors' Championship. They finished 9th. They finished 7th the year before, so they dropped 2 spots. But I think you'd rather take 9th 1 year and then have a better chance of maybe 6th or 7th this year than have 2 seasons finishing 8th. Like I just don't think there would be much value in that. James Vowles has been adamant all this time that even when he was battling for 7th in 2023, he said, yeah, I'd like to beat AlphaTauri, who was their rivals at the time, but also it's not why I'm here. not here to finish 7th rather than 8th. I'm here to get this team back to winning races and getting podiums. So every decision has been made with that in mind. In terms of 2025, what do you need or want to see from them?
This is a tricky one because look, you don't, if Williams slip back to being last, then obviously that you don't want that from them. That's not a good way to see out these regulations. But again, because they're pinning quite so much on these 2026 regs, that this is pretty terrible. It's not necessarily the end of the world. They are still getting ready for next year. I think you'd want to see at least operationally that they are top notch, even if the car isn't there, because that's sort of again like the last piece of the puzzle for 2026. If it's a bad 2025 car, you say, well, fine, because they're all concentrating on 2026, and we've seen it before. Teams have done this, but I think at least operationally they need to look like they are all singing off the same hymn sheet and are ready to go, because that's the sort of thing that they can't afford to. If they do have a good car in 2026, they can't afford to have that side letting them down. And again, I've already referenced him, but Komatsu, with his changes, he said he's made a track side for Haas. So that again is in reference to they had a more competitive car, and he thought that the trackside stuff was letting them down. So that's the sort of thing I think you will want to see. If they are like a 7th or an 8th or a 9th or even a 10th, I don't think it's going to be that concerning to me. That doesn't really matter where they finish for 2025, to be honest.
I think Vowles will have got understanding as well from pretty much everyone involved that 2025 isn't the goal. Like he's said as part of this quote as well, that he's got the backing of Doralton Capital to make these long-term decisions. So he's got the backing of the important people that decide whether he keeps his job or not. The two drivers, from Carlos Sainz's perspective, it'll be his first season at Williams. It might be a bit of a shock to the system for Carlos Sainz, who has been in a at least semi-competitive car ever since his Renault days, or like it's been a while since he's been in a car that hasn't been at least capable of scoring regular points. So it might be a bit of a shock to the system for him, but I think Sainz is invested for what the long-term project is. And of course, Alex Albon on the other side of the garage.
Who?
So Carlos Sainz drives one car.
Oh, that's a good joke, that.
F1 teams have two cars.
Do they?
Yeah.
Not Williams, do they?
So, yeah, Carlos is driving one car, Sainz is driving the other. It's actually Carlos Sainz and his dad. Yes, but Alex Albon has been there long enough that it would be really stupid if he wasn't understanding of it in 2025. Like, he's gone through all of the hard work of being at a team where it hasn't been competitive. It just wouldn't make sense for him to turn around in 2025 and be like, well, this car's not very competitive, is it?
Yeah, well, what's going on?
So, yeah, I think he'll have understanding from pretty much everyone that regardless of what the actual result, I agree with you completely that there does still need to be some progress, but I'm more interested in what the progress is in strategic decisions, pit stops. They haven't in recent times been great on pit stops. It'd be good to see them climb that championship as well. Just, like you say, just getting them as ready as they can be for these new regulations, because that's the sort of thing that will at least carry over from one era to the next. Vowles also did have a few comments about beyond 2026. He said, what we already know internally is 2026 isn't going to be the be-all and end-all. It will just be a positive step in the right direction. 27 and 28 should be steps above that again. So he's not pinning everything on just 2026 as the new year of regulations. Do you think that's a healthy approach?
Firstly, when you say be-all and end-all, I just think of Ian. As in
Ian be-all and end-all.
Look, this is a sensible approach for Vowles, because as much as, the teams of Williams and Aston Martin are pinning hopes on 2026, you'd probably say you'd expect maybe more Aston Martin to be nearer the front straight away than Williams, just given the investment they've got, the backing they've got of Lawrence Stroll, the team they're building with Adrian Newey, with Honda, and versus Williams at the resource they've got. If Williams turn up to 2026 and have a podium, a car that's willing to fight for podiums, brilliant. I will bow down to the wise daddy Vowles. But
come on, Merc engine.
It's gonna be
2014 all over again.
Absolute rocket ship.
Yeah.
So if they do, brilliant. But I would hazard a guess that's probably not going to happen. What you want to see from Williams is a credible step forward into that at least upper half of the midfield, and they can build from there. Because I just think James Vowles has just had less time at this than the likes of Aston Martin have, or other teams that are working towards 2026. So, yeah, I think this is a sensible approach. I think if he was coming out and saying we're going to be world champions in 2026, then that would be unwise. And I think this is a sensible approach. And again, as you said, it's good that he's got the backing of Dorot, and this is a long-term project. And it's not just all going to come to bear in 2026. This is longer term than that.
Yeah, I think it's a wise approach because, as he says, like if you start to pin absolutely everything on just one solitary year, then it probably sends the wrong message to the important people within the organization, and just everyone in the organization really that are working towards not just one season. I do think that the step up from 25 to 26 does need to be a bigger step than anything we've seen from Williams and Vowles so far. So, if they were to, I don't know, score 30 points this season, and then they were to score 50 in 2026, that's not enough. I think it needs to be a bigger improvement than that. But I do agree with the overall point of it still needs to be, 27 and 28 should be steps above whatever they achieve in 2026. You're probably right that the likes of Aston Martin are going to be in a better position to compete with the front runners early on in this new set of regulations. But it will be interesting to see where Williams stack up with the likes of Audi that have kind of been parallel to Williams in waiting it out. Of course, they've waited it out for different reasons. Audi because they haven't been in the sport and it's just been Sauber waiting to become Audi. Williams have been around, but it's still the same sort of we're hanging our hats on the next generation of cars. So how they stuck up against Audi and maybe a few of those other teams with similar objectives, that will be interesting to see. Let's take our final break on this episode. On the other side, we're ranking some of Verstappen's best seasons. Welcome back, everyone. Something that the official F1 website did a couple of days ago is rank all of Max Verstappen's seasons in F1. So he's now done 10 full seasons in F1, and they went all the way from 10 down to 1, picking what their best season for Verstappen was. We're only going to do top 5 here today. So it'd be interesting to see how our list compares with the F1.
Nice.
Yeah. Let's start at number 5, because that feels like a good place to start on a top 5 list.
That would be a good place to start.
Where are you going?
At number 5 for me, I've got his debut year, 2015.
Like that.
I almost put 2016 here, which is based on that would be his second year in F1. But I actually, which obviously features his first win in the Red Bull. But I think just as a more impressive year, I think 2015 sits above it. So I'd actually have 2016 at number 6. But yeah, 2015 I've put at number 5. He and Carlos Sainz were obviously they debuted at the same time in the Toro Rosso. I mean, Sainz was very impressive that year as well.
Had a good year.
Very good
very
year.
Unlucky year.
Yeah, and actually pretty underrated versus Verstappen. But Verstappen, as all the great drivers do, made an impact immediately in F1. He also made an impact with the barrier at Saint Devote, I seem to remember, with Romain Grosjean. But that aside, that race before that moment was actually brilliant as well. He did some great overtaking people whilst they were being lapped. If you haven't seen that, go and YouTube it because it's brilliant. But yeah, Verstappen made an instant impact in 2015. I'm thinking, the move around Felipe Nasr at Blanchimont in Spa, for crying out loud.
Ooh, yes.
He was an instant star, and obviously Red Bull then realised this and put him in the Red Bull only a few races in 2016. But I think as a number 5 on the list, 2015, because let's not forget, he was like 17.
Well, that was the point I was going to make, is that you're right to say all of these other greats made an impact very early on in their careers.
Not that early.
Yeah, like he was so young, and you could tell almost from the first race, like, yeah, this kid's not bad. This kid might have a future.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
I didn't have it on my list, but I think the reasons are very solid. I had number 5, 2022. So his second championship, which I feel like was an important year for him because, rightly or wrongly, there were question marks coming out of 2021. That we know that the championship he won in 21 was done so under controversial circumstances. And that doesn't take away from the impressiveness of the season, but there were still question marks about, could he do it again in... I'm trying to be careful with my words here, because I do not mean this as an insult to Verstappen in any way whatsoever.
Less auspicious circumstances.
Yeah. And 2022 was fantastic. Like, he had a bit of pressure from Ferrari early on. The reliability of the car wasn't great to start the year, but he was helped by Ferrari as well, being Ferrari. But he really did prove himself down the stretch in that year, and it wasn't very close at the end of the year at all. He actually broke quite a few records that year, and almost none of them exist because of what he did in 2023. But at the time, like, what he did as a season of dominance was pretty impressive. So, yeah, I've got 2022 at number 5. What have you got number 4?
Number 4, I've gone for 2019.
So I very nearly put it on my list.
It's obviously the Red Bull switched to Honda engines in 2019 after Honda's pretty infamous run with McLaren. And it was a bit unknown. Red Bull had not really had any real success since they obviously had some wins in 2017 and 2018. They were with Ricciardo and more so than Verstappen. Verstappen did pick up wins in those years. Obviously Ricciardo then went off to Renault, which turned out to be a great idea. And Verstappen was team leader of that Red Bull, and with a teammate that was nowhere near him all year. Two teammates that were nowhere near him really all year. So Verstappen was a lone soldier, which he has sort of remained basically for the remainder of that of his time at Red Bull. But that year, I think let's not forget, Mercedes were dominant. They weren't 2020 dominant, but they were dominant. So Verstappen had to make the most of the chances he was given, and he did. Germany, another one we've reviewed on our historic review podcast, Germany 2019 in the wet. He was sensational there, obviously won that. Austria 2019 with a slightly controversial end with Charles Leclerc, but again, brilliant race from him. Have we reviewed that one too?
Yes, we have.
I'm not doing this on purpose, but it's plugs. It's like an extension cable. So there's that one as well. And then did he have another win later on that year? Or am I making that up? Maybe not. Maybe there was those two.
No, he won 3.
I'm sure he won a third. Did he win Mexico as well?
I don't know. I'm certain he won a third race, but could not tell you where.
Anyway, yeah, I'm pretty sure he has. But yeah, 2019 with a car that was not really not that it wasn't worthy of winning races, but it certainly wasn't the quickest car out there. And Verstappen, I think we then saw, especially then again as we went into 2020, this was a scenario where a driver was out driving the car somewhat. Not to say it was a terrible car in either 2019 or 20, but we saw it was like the second phase of Max Verstappen we now know. The first phase being like 2015 to 18 for me. And then the next phase was 2019 to 2020, 2021. And then we go into phase 3. So yeah, this is the beginning of that.
I've got 2021 at number 4. Obviously his first championship winning season. He was out-qualified by his teammate Sergio Perez once all season, and he was out-finished by his teammate once all season. That's pretty good going. When Red Bull were a little bit quicker in 2021, because they did go in phases of Mercedes being a bit quicker, then Red Bull being a bit quicker. He took advantage when that Red Bull did have the pace. I think he did a very good job of that all year. I think honestly, and this kind of works for and against him, I think he probably should have wrapped up that championship before Abu Dhabi. I think he had the pace too that year. But obviously, Hamilton does a very good job fighting back, absolutely. But I think a few...
Baku,
yeah. There were just... he could have won that one beforehand. The reason it's not higher, there were a few... A lot of people focus on Abu Dhabi, and I understand why.
Saudi
and Brazil, man. Like...
Oh, they weren't good.
No, they weren't. And like Brazil, for example, he doesn't get penalized for what he does going off track. And I stand by, he absolutely should have been. I don't think some of his racing was top notch that year. So that's why it's no higher than 4th, but still on the list. What have you got number 3?
The same year, 2021. For all the reasons you've mentioned, really. As I sort of say, I think that he's just on the cusp of the next phase of Max Verstappen in this year, and he steps up at another level. It's not perfect, as you already mentioned, with some of those races. However, there are some performances in here which I actually think get just overlooked with the whole general drama of that year. We weren't there, sadly, that one, but Austin that year, where he does one less stop than Hamilton, and Hamilton's hunting him down, and he saves his tyres enough to fend him off in that last stint, or last few laps. So I think that one always gets sort of missed. And then there's just like the flip side of that, where he was just some races where he was totally dominant. Both the races at the Red Bull Ring, where, I mean, they were pretty rare, dull Austrian/Styrian GPs, and I can't remember anything that happened there. Really? Exactly.
Nope.
But Verstappen dominated both of those. We obviously had a double header of those because it was still COVID, and also like Zandvoort as well, where he smashed it there. So it was a transformational year for Verstappen. Again, he wasn't perfect by any stretch, but it was, like I said, I think it was just another gear. He stepped up another gear, and I think that he took a lot from that year. Obviously, he took championship, but he took a lot from that year, which he's then applied to the rest of his career so far.
Number 3 for me, I've got 2020.
Valid.
He finished 9 points off of Valtteri Bottas. He had no right to do that. That Mercedes, you've already referenced how dominant that Mercedes was. There were times in that season where that Mercedes was about 1 second faster than Red Bull and indeed anyone else. Again, he finished 9 points off one of their drivers. And I was thinking back at like all of and there weren't as many races in 2020 compared to some of the more recent seasons, again, based on COVID. But Turkey was a bad race for Verstappen. He doesn't have a good race there. I couldn't think of another one. I was scrambling around trying to think of another bad race he had that year. I think he had made that, and you've kind of alluded to 2019 as well. I do think 2019 and 2020 are underrated for Verstappen. I think he made a jump before people think he did in 2021. I just don't think he had the car yet.
Yeah.
Because that Mercedes was just that good. He was also horribly unlucky that year. Like he finished, I'd look at this. He finished fewer laps than anyone else who completed all of the races that year. Like he had the second most DNFs of the season. And yet, he finished 9 points off of Bottas. And
yeah, there were some instances where he got past Bottas or was fighting Bottas when he shouldn't have been anywhere near him.
Yeah, and I think there were at least one or two retirements again where he was either very close to the front.
Wasn't Imola? He got past Bottas in his tyre blew.
Yes,
yeah,
that's the one. Yeah. So yeah, I definitely had to put this on here.
Yeah, I realize now when I put 2019, I probably should have put 2019 and 20 as one. Not that they are one season, but they are. That's pretty. You're right. They he referenced, they represent a time where he was driving better than that car would allow him to go. Basically,
yeah. Top two then. Who've you got in second?
Number two, I put 2024. Look, he obviously won the championship. He had some stellar performances. Brazil, really stands out there. He was very good at the start of the year. I think there were some performances in places like Imola again, actually in 24, where I don't think he probably should have won that with the speed of the McLaren. Miami, for the fact he even was in that fight to begin with the speed of the McLaren. And then some of those ones in the mid part of the year where he managed to, scrape decent results, even if he wasn't winning. He's let down by things like Mexico and maybe Hungary, which is why I haven't put this higher up. But 2024, I guess, again, I think people will see it, will maybe underrate it because it's more expected for Verstappen to do that well. And I actually think it goes undervalued as a season for him because of what we saw, what we expect of him. But actually, it was a stellar season, taking out those couple of bad points aside. It was a stellar season for Verstappen, so I put it number two.
I'm going to assume we've got the same top two, and I was really unsure what order to go in because they're both great years, the two most recent years, for very different reasons. Like they don't look anything like each other. Eventually, I settled for 2023 in second place, but it's so close. The man won all but 3 races, and I'm not putting it number one. It just doesn't seem right. He was top 2 in all but 1 race. That Singapore Grand Prix that was won by Carlos Sainz was the only race all year he was not first or second. And again, he was only second twice. He beat Sergio Perez, his teammate, by 290 points. If you added together Perez and Hamilton, who finished second and third in the championship, if you added their points together, Verstappen would have beaten them. And the number of records he got that year, I think a lot of them will stay for a long time.
Big old time.
I'm going to guess you've got that number one.
No, I've actually gone for 2017. No, I'm joking.
Oh, bold.
No, it's 2023. I've put at the top. I was with you, Ben. I didn't know which way round to put these. I settled with 23 because, yes, you could argue he wasn't as challenged, competitively challenged as he was in 2024, but he still had times where he had to fight through the field, and it wasn't always like it was a nailed on Verstappen's going to win this day in 2023. Yeah, he was sublime. I've tried to think, and this is kind of what settled it for me. I was trying to think of a time in 2023 where I went, oh, that wasn't great from Verstappen. And the only real one I could give him is Singapore, but the car wasn't it didn't work for him there. But apart from that, in a 23 race season,
I mean, Perez had the legs on him in Baku, but you're nitpicking.
Exactly. So that's why I settled for it, because it was pretty much a faultless season for Verstappen. I know people will say, that he had the dominant car, but which is true. But I think there was still times where he had to work for it, and he was sublime. And I think to like Spa, where he had to come from basically last to win that, and it became
he won it after a third of the race.
Yeah, well, exactly. But it became in 23. It became such a he's still going to win it. It became felt like a known quantity that I feel that goes overlooked. He still had to get through the field. It doesn't matter what way you look at it, whether your car's dominant or not. He still had to do it. There's no one that's won it from that far back before, and he did it. So I think it cannot go overlooked. So that's why I put it first.
Yeah, I had 2024 first for much of the same reasons you put it second on this list. He had to be the difference in 2024. There's a reason why it is very rare a constructor's champion finishes third. A constructor finishes third and one of their drivers wins the drivers' championship. It hasn't happened in over 40 years until Verstappen went ahead and did it. Sergio Perez was 8th. And look, I know Perez didn't have a good season by any stretch of the imagination, but you can't convince me that a big part of Perez looking as bad as he did is because of the excellence of what Verstappen was able to do. Like, as soon as I think it was a very complete season, and that he just needed to, and it's based on the circumstance, I appreciate, but he needed to show all sides of his game. Like, he had to show how dominant he could be. The first 6 races of the season were kind of the same as 2023, really. And then you get the middle part of the season where he's eking out these wins. And then you get the final part of the season where he's eking out podiums and claiming these special wins like Brazil. I think if it wasn't for Brazil, people would probably focus on his win at Qatar a lot more. That car was not great at that point, and he managed to get the win there. You're splitting hairs when you get to 24 and 23, I think, though.
He's quite good, isn't he?
He is quite good. He is quite good indeed.
Oh, no. I just realised what's happening. It's the end of the podcast, and we don't know what to do every time.
Should we just keep going? We never have to do an outro if we just keep talking
until Sam comes back.
Yeah, it will turn up in this chat on Sunday.
We're still going. Like, oh, thank God.
Sam gets out of it. Folks, you can catch us in many different places. Let's start with our good friend Patreon, but we don't really need to plug because we've already plugged about 12 times today. But if you do want to sign up to Patreon, the link is in the description. We do more than just historic race reviews, we promise.
Promise,
yeah. Only thing we mentioned, but we do have standard episodes. Beer with Breaking has gone out today as we're recording this, yesterday as you're listening to this. That's every single month. And of course, we're only, how many weeks are we off the new season? Not many.
Nice.
6?
Yeah, probably something like that. That sounds about right. Yeah.
But as soon as that comes back, we get back to power rankings as well. So there's plenty to look forward to on Patreon. How many stars can you leave on a review?
5 is the minimum. And
the maximum as well.
The maximum. So that's the only answer. There you go.
Yeah, you can do that wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on social. Late Breaking F1 across the board. We're on TikTok because we're down with the kids. We're on Instagram because we're down with the less so kids. And we're on Facebook, but we don't use it.
And Twitter.
And Twitter, yes.
Or X, if you want to call it a stupid name. We're on Facebook. We haven't used Facebook for years. Anyway. Oh, dear.
Oh, no. Do you know what I've realised?
What, mate?
Not just an outro we need to do. It's
oh,
the last
no.
episode in January. We need to do some birthday shout-outs.
Oh, my God. This is a disaster. I can't believe Sam has missed this.
Oh, I bet he's chuckling to himself right now. And he's probably saying, happy birthday. Yes, we do have birthday shout outs, another Patreon benefit. If you want to get involved, if you're on the top tier, we'll give you a birthday shout out in the month of your birthday. So January, last episode of January, we've got 7 names to run through today. Mark Flynn, who it's your birthday today, Mark Flynn, as we're recording this. Happy birthday to you. We've got Pommy, Jan 18th. Happy birthday to you. Thank you, children. Brooke, it might be your birthday as you're listening to this today, January 29th. If it's not, and you're not spending your birthday listening to the podcast, I rescind my happy birthday to you.
I hope you have an unhappy birthday.
Happy birthday, Brooke. Kirsten, or our best friend we've never met, Kirsten, January 25th, so a couple of days ago. Hope you had a great day. Shannon, January 12th. Brown 30, January 16th, and Alex W, January 7th. Happy birthday, one and all.
Crikey. Is that it?
Yeah, I'm calling it.
we try waiting for Sam to come back, but we're calling it now. Bye-bye.
We're calling it. Make sure you tune in on Sunday because I promise Sam will be back. But in the meantime, I've been Ben Hocking.
And I've been Ian Beale and Endel.
And remember, keep breaking late.